Everyone who makes a painting immediately gravitates towards one of these here. You got your completely useless, most of the time, canvas boards, classic wood panel, and of course, most well known, the stretched canvas. And while all of these can be great options, usually they tend to come with some major downsides that can completely ruin the experience of creating a work of art. Whether it's the fact that some of these are so incredibly slippery that you can't paint on them, or so absorbent that they completely suck out all the colors and life out of your paintings and turn them into a muddy mess. But there is a painting surface that I want to show you that almost got it all. And that would be this incredibly unspectacular and unassuming looking thing here. You can create soft gradients on this. You can create sharp lines, smooth transitions. You can have intense, vibrant colors to the point where your painting looks like it has its own light source. And to top it all off, you can change the size of your painting pretty much whenever you want. So, no idea why this thing has fallen out of fashion. It used to be one of the great painting surfaces that everybody used pretty much during the entirety of the last century. But these days you hardly see it, and yeah, I believe it's wildly, criminally underrated. So let me show you why this thing is one of the best things you can paint on, and one of my personal favorite painting surfaces.
Hello, children.
I have absolutely no idea why you don't see this more often and why hardly anybody is doing this, but one of my personal favorite painting surfaces to paint on with oil paint is watercolor paper. Literally watercolor paper. I know it sounds super counterintuitive, but trust me, this is one of the best painting surfaces you can create, and it's not only incredibly satisfying to paint on, but it's also super cheap and affordable. The only caveat is that you have to use super heavy watercolor paper. It doesn't even need to be watercolor paper, to be honest. That's just what I like to use. And you can't use it right away. You have to put in some time and effort, and you have to prepare it. But it really doesn't take too much, and I guarantee you it's 100% worth the effort. I'm using super heavy watercolor paper here, something like 600 grams per square meter, so pretty much one of the heaviest things you can get. But again, it doesn't even need to be watercolor paper, you just need some heavy paper that holds up to the whole treatment with water-based gesso or primer and all the subsequent paint layers. Next I want to thin it down a bit with water, just a tiny bit so it's easier to spread on or to brush on. By the way, you see this thing here? This is 15 years of mixing primer to prepare painting surfaces. Once you got it thinned down to a workable consistency, so basically something like heavy cream. It shouldn't be too runny, but it also should flow, basically. You're pretty much good to go, and you can start applying your first thin layer. Once you've applied your first thin layer, you let it dry for, I would say, 15 to 20 minutes, and then you come back and you apply a second coat. So what I like to do is, at the very least, 2 coats, but preferably 3 to 4 coats. And once you've done that, you are left with a beautiful painting surface that is almost like a mixture between paper, canvas, and a wood panel. It has some texture to it. The surface isn't 100% smooth, but it's also not slippery like some wood panels tend to be, or some even smoother surfaces like metal or plastic. To me, this kind of combines the best of all worlds, and it's incredibly satisfying to work with. Especially considering that you can now cut it into all kinds of different shapes. You can decide on which size you want to have your painting surface after the fact. And yeah, to me, this comes with a lot of freedom and a lot of upsides. I like to sand the last layer because I really want to make sure that it's not too rough, as these paper surfaces and pretty much all like natural surfaces like fabric or wood panels tend to be after priming. But once you've done that, you could technically get started right away. But I personally like to add one more step to this prep part to really make sure that I end up with the best painting surface possible. So once I got my drawing and my outlines finished, what I like to do is I like to apply some sort of sealer or spray varnish to, first of all, make sure that I don't lose my outlines and my drawing when I start painting, but also to make sure that my painting surface is as well prepared as it can be and protected. You don't want to run into any issues later on where the oil from your oil paint gets absorbed by the paper because you haven't prepared it well enough. So this is just like an additional step to really make sure that the surface is as good as it can be, basically.
After applying this protective coat, you're technically good to go, and everything else from here on is purely optional. But in many cases, what I like to do with these sorts of painting surfaces is add another additional layer of acrylic paint before getting started. And this really does two things. On the one side, this is just another protective barrier between the painting surface and the oil paint, so making sure that the surface, the paper, is as well protected from all the oil and the oil paint as it can be. But maybe even more importantly in this case, it's a creative decision. The moment I start with some color and some texture, I set the tone for the entire painting. And this way I can make sure that it turns out as interesting as it can. It also helps with tying all the different colors together and creating some interesting looking effects. But really it's about making sure that I'm able to create the best painting I can. Now, if you want to hear more about the process, I highly encourage you to head over to Patreon. There's going to be a commentary video where I go a bit more in depth on the technical aspects of painting and creating an image like this. And also this painting, once the video comes out, will be available in my shop for a change again. You might have to be quick, but by the time the video comes out, it will be up in my web shop and it will be available. But the painting surface itself, don't get me wrong, there is nothing inherently magical or special about this. You can create a great painting surface with a piece of wood or cardboard or cloth, fabric. Technically, theoretically, all of that is possible. It's just the fact that most of these painting surfaces end up with wildly different properties, and depending on what you want to do and how experienced and advanced you are as a painter, this could make a difference between a completely frustrating and annoying painting experience and a painting experience that's actually pleasant and fun. When you paint a very small painting, for example, something like this here, and you have a fabric or a painting surface with some heavy texture, you will have an incredibly frustratingly hard time creating sharp lines, fine details, sharp edges. All of that does not go well with small-sized paintings or painting surfaces that have super heavy texture. It's just the way it is. And on the flip side, if you've ever tried to create a smooth gradient on a large-sized smooth canvas or smooth painting surface, you know what frustration means. And depending on which kind of primer you then use on top of these surfaces, you can even amplify some of the properties or completely destroy them. Making a good painting, is not as simple as just grabbing a canvas and then going for it. It really makes a difference what kind of painting surface you use, and depending on which one you pick, you might end up with a dramatically different end result. Unfortunately, the truth is the ideal painting surface doesn't exist. But this one here, this sort of hybrid paper painting surface, kind of manages to have a bit of everything. You can still create somewhat smooth transitions, but it also has enough tooth to it that you can paint without the paint just sliding around constantly. All the skin tones that I painted here is a combination of color blocks, so different shapes that have very clear and defined outlines, but then also some super soft and smooth transitions, and that in combination with Captain Hook's or Dustin Hoffman's very sharp features kind of creates a beautiful illusion of skin and human flesh. And it's something that is not very easy to do when you just have a canvas, and also not particularly easy when you're painting on a wood panel. The painting surface should ideally allow you to not only apply thick paint, but to also create very thin and transparent layers of paint. And play around with textures. Let you decide where you want to use more texture and where you maybe don't want to have any texture at all. And usually with traditional canvas boards, wood panels, stretched canvases, you don't really have that freedom and flexibility. These kinds of paper and cardboard painting surfaces are obviously nothing new. It's just that most of the time this is something that illustrators will gravitate towards, and it's not really something that you see very often in the world of fine art or traditional painting. But if you think about it, that also kind of makes sense. An illustrator needs to work very quickly. It's got to be efficient, it's got to be fast, but it also has to be very good. It can't be bad quality. So illustrators are typically very good at finding super smart, cheap, and cost-effective solutions to problems. And the problem of a painting surface that sort of combines the best of all worlds is right here. It's of course not without its downsides. I mean, creating a large painting, a very large painting with this is pretty much impossible, and also hanging something like this is definitely not as easy and straightforward as it is with the stretched canvas. I mean, you just take the stretched canvas and hang it on your wall. With something like this, a flat sheet of paper, you have to prepare it or frame it in a certain way before you can even hang it. So certainly not without its downsides, but just from a technical perspective, just from the point of view of an artist creating a work of art, the beauty of the transitions, the brush marks and brush strokes, the way that they stand on top of the painting surface whenever you want, the smooth transitions, the intensity and vibrancy of the color. I'm not really sure if the final image shows it or if the camera is even able to capture it, but it all just looks very much alive and vibrant and almost tangible in a way where you feel like you can touch it and move it around, almost as if it's not a painting but a sculpture out of paint, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to describe it, but I really, really hope that once the tape comes off, the final result will speak for itself and you'll be able to see for yourself why this forgotten painting surface definitely needs to make a comeback.